Much for being patient for our technology here. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we will talk about Native American art and artists with guests. Lulani Arquette, President and CEO of the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. John Vanausdall, President and CEO of the Eiteljorg Museum in Indianapolis. And Della Warrior, Director of the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show and we'll announce results. And the questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining. I am so pleased that we were able to put this together and to talk about cultures that are so important to American history. That really need to be exposed. And I'd like to start, Lulani, with you. You have this amazing organization that was originally seeded by the Ford Foundation and then became independent, and you've been running it ever since. Could you talk a little bit about your role, the role of the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation to advance knowledge of these cultures and the art and artists of these diverse cultures, and also talk about the importance of our understanding in this country of Native arts and culture?
Sure, thank you. And I'd just like to say aloha kakahiaka. I'm hail from Native Hawaiian from Hawaii, but I'm living now in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon area. And I'd also like to thank you, Mark and Oppenheim, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And it's great to see Della and John again, 2 of my esteemed colleagues that I really respect and their leadership. So NACF, the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, was launched about 11 years ago. And we were launched with intent to provide a venue and a platform for Native artists and culture bearers, and to provide more support, raise the visibility of, and help build and strengthen the field. So what we've done in we've provided primarily financial support through fellowship programs to individual Native artists, and we have helped them. Over 504 now. We've helped advance their artistic practice in their careers. We've helped them raise their visibility and access at things like convenings and on panels with partners. And we've partnered with other institutions, both of them that are sitting here also. We've done some work together, and to particularly present their work through exhibitions, performances, and to hear their voices. We also, through our fellowship program, we were able to, we found how important it was for mentoring in our Native communities. We know the value of mentoring, of passing on that knowledge and that artistic practice and those traditions and values that are so important in our Native communities. So we have also a mentor fellowship, where it was a rigorous 1-year program where apprentices were enabled to work with mentor fellows on their chosen practices. And then through all of this past years, we've recognized the really profound importance that arts and cultures have in bringing to light social, environmental, and cultural justice for our Native peoples. It is that Native, that creative spirit that is often at the forefront during these movements. And in almost every century and every generation. So as we move into our future work, we have just finished our 2021 to 2025 strategic plan. This is perfect timing. And we'll be focusing on new programming called The Shift: Transformative Change in Indigenous Arts, which combines all of this work we've been doing in support of individual Native artists, mentoring, and social change work. And this is a program, actually it was just launched 2 days ago. And It focuses on efforts that are built upon community cultural assets and resilience and strengths, and it draws increased attention to our Native artists, our communities, our perspectives, and our challenges, but particularly through raising the visibility of our strength in our communities, the strength of our values and our artistic practices, and what we have to contribute and bring to the discussion as part of this nation, and including challenges relative to climate change and sacred sites and waters and food sovereignty, and also including how we need to look at our institutions in different ways and maybe reorganize, re-engineer our institutions to be much more community involved and community led and artistic led and involved. So, and we also have an early career support program that we're launching for that provide critical support to newer career artists with careers under 10 years and help them to grow their careers and launch in much greater ways. And then finally, the last thing is, I think you folks might have heard, we are the Center for Native Arts and Culture is launching here in Portland, Oregon. We were just really humbled, blessed to get the gift of a building in Portland, Oregon, an urban Portland, Oregon, that will become the new Center for Native Arts and Cultures. And it will provide a critically needed environment to catalyze Native peoples, artists, and culture bearers to influence positive social, cultural, and environmental change. We will have, it's going to be a thriving place for presentation, exhibition, and symposiums, and both locally for local artists and nationally. And I'll stop there.
John, could you take some of the themes that Lulani raised and comment not only on the work of your work at the Eiteljorg Museum, but also about the sensibility surrounding Native arts and culture, right? There is this sort of colonialist approach, a paternalistic approach. There is a cultural appropriation that occurs. Yet it is really important that we recognize from the heart of the art that all people need to be engaged with all art and need to be informed by it. So there is this very tricky space to navigate when we're talking about ethnic art and artifacts, whether it's Jewish or African American or Latin Hispanic or Asian or Native American. How do we present art in a way that is respectful, but that is also contextualized so that every time you see a work of art, you actually can see it from different perspectives and absorb the knowledge and the wisdom that it imparts?
Well, I think the most important way to move away from the way it's been done in the past is through engagement with the people themselves. And we work with living artists, and we have a national council of Native peoples that advise us. But I think engaging the communities is really the most important part of the work we do. And another key part of the Eiteljorg's presentation is contemporary Native art. Art that may be painting or sculpture or mixed media or digital media today that is wonderfully contemporary, wonderfully evocative, and a part of mainstream American art. And I think we've done that primarily through the Eiteljorg Contemporary Art Fellowship that began 20 years ago. And through that, we artists every biennium award $25,000 fellowship, produce a catalog of their work, introduce them to the public, exhibit their work, and then promote them, not only among other Native American museums, but the general museums as well. So I think more than anything else, it's that sense of inclusivity that Native artists are at the table. We're providing a platform for them to share their art and share their ideas. We also do that through artist in residence program we have. About 4 artists are invited to come and work in residence in the museum every year. And then we have an Indian market that brings customary, more traditional artists as well as contemporary artists to sell their works to the public.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is the fact that a lot of Native arts bridge what is typically shown in museums, and the hierarchy of art in fine arts museums breaks down when it comes to Native arts, where you have decorative arts in fine arts museums are frequently marginalized or not as respected as paintings and so on, whereas it seems that in Native arts, this sort of confluence of storytelling, decoration, tradition, the various visual aspects, Della, it's a different experience, at least it is to my eyes, going from museum to museum. It's a very rich experience. How do you present the connections between the various aspects of culture that are, that at least to me, seem to be such a holistic experience as opposed to something where you hang a painting on the wall and just sort of look at it? How do you present that richness in your museum?
Well, art is all, about the people that create it, from their culture, their history that goes into making that piece of art. So in our museum, we engage with the communities. If we're doing an exhibition, we work with community curators and include their stories about the art, because it's really fascinating to hear these stories from a Native perspective. It's more about the whole history of that piece rather than just looking at it as an object of beauty, or an object to be studied. But we really focus on getting people from the community to talk about to help with the actually curating the exhibit. And then throughout all of our exhibits, we have year-long programming whereby we include artists from those communities to do demonstrations, to come in and say, do a pottery demonstration or do murals, or to talk about art and art issues. So that is, just a standard practice that the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture has been doing for a number of years, is working with Native communities to make sure that their stories are woven into the exhibition rather than just coming in and looking at beautiful pieces of art and not connecting them with the people who made it, why they made it, how they made it, and all those things that go into it, including the ceremonies and sometimes the songs and certainly prayers go into art. And it's all very spiritual because Native people are spiritually based.
You're making such a good point, because very often you see in contemporary environments the finished work, whereas in my experience that there's a greater emphasis on the technique that is on display, the storytelling that is on display, the cultural rituals that connect to the creation process.
Mhm.
It's really deeply affecting, and it's a completely different experience for me coming in without that background. There's also the other very interesting element in that Native communities are so incredibly diverse, and the attached cultures are so amazing. Lulani, one of the things that I experienced when we did the search that resulted in your selection was that we had representatives from so many different tribes, and there were so many different starting positions. How do you bring people together across these different sensibilities, so that the community can actually function as a self-strengthening community, but also with respect to individual cultures, and not try to genericize, between, Della's sensibility, a Native Hawaiian sensibility, Native Alaskans sensibility, and the various tribes in Alaska. How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's a great question, John, and that's something that I think all of us have worked on over the years. And as a national organization, you're exactly right. And with 574 federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native corporations and over 500,000 Native Hawaiians across the United States, you're absolutely right. It's and each with our own unique voices and cultural practices and whatnot. So we're in our grant making, one of our real intentionalities around our grant making, and especially with our grant review panels, is to make sure we look really across the broad swath of the geography. We're very attentive to the geography when we're reviewing and awarding our grants to make sure that it's inclusive across all regions as much as possible, and including the outreach that we do and the site visits that we did pre-COVID. It was built into the work that we do. But also this bringing together, one of the things that we've done is had convenings. We're big champions of convenings and bringing bringing artists together from Hawaii, Alaska, and the continental Native tribes in these convenings so that they can share their work. And that we then have a public facing. We did 2 convenings in 2017 and 18, and some of our future work is very heavy, going to be involved in national convenings of the field. And we find that when you bring people together, now this virtual formats are what we're doing now. So there will be probably an element of virtual formats along with in-person once we get past COVID. But I think the virtual will always also be part of the platform. But we're finding that when we bring people together, that it gives them an opportunity to really engage and learn with one another, whether they be an artist, an administrator, a non-native, because we always do public facing work with other partner institutions, that has helped create a sense of connectivity and understanding about our common humanity.
And then there are sorry for interrupting, there are also the great collections. If you look at the great collections beyond the Eiteljorg and your museum over in Santa Fe, Della, what other great collections are there that people can access? We just did a poll. We found that 70% of people had viewed Native collections in the recent past. There were, and then it kind of fell off pretty quickly. What are the great collections that you admire, that you feel are must see if you're interested, so that you can engage in this incredible richness in North America, Della?
Well, John talked about, that their museum focuses on contemporary. We also have one contemporary gallery, and we'll open another one next year. We just received a great gift from a couple here in Santa Fe, longtime supporters, and so we'll be opening another gallery. But art is always changing, and it's dynamic and it's forward. So one of the new forms of art, Native art, to be collected, I think, is glass sculpture. We are opening an exhibit on, hopefully, God willing, with this pandemic, we can open on April 18th. We will have 32 Native sculptures from glass artists from all across the country, including Indigenous people, from artists from Australia and New Zealand. So we'll have, I think, 132 pieces. And it's so fascinating how these artists, and I think we probably have 40 different tribal representations, but they have taken their traditional designs from their respective cultures and incorporated them into these beautiful pieces of glass. And it's going to be a really fascinating exhibit. and I think it's the first of its kind. There's a book out that we just, Letitia Chambers, Dr. Chambers is the curator, and it's a beautiful book that shows these artists' work and tells their stories. So, art is always different. And it's a way, I think, of educating the public that Native people are changing too. We're not static, and we're not the people that they see on TV. But we are in the 21st century, and the art is different now than it was 200 years ago or 300 years ago. However, it still contains those spiritual aspects and cultural from those communities.
And John, what other museums do you think have great collections? I mean, I'm looking here. I was just sort of jotting down. Rochester, the Rochester Museum and Science Center has a fantastic collection that still needs to be exposed more. You have the Royal Ontario Museum, and on the West Coast, you have the Audin Museum. There's Numai. There's the Heard Museum and the Gilcrease over in Arizona. What other museums do you admire for their collections and their presentation of art?
Well, you just covered a lot of bases with the ones you mentioned. Obviously, the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington has an extraordinarily important and large collection. The Royal BC Museum in Vancouver is one of my favorite places to visit always. And the Autry Museum in Los Angeles,
Yes.
combined with the Southwest Museum. And they have an extraordinarily important collection. And I'm very impressed with what they're doing with it as well. So there are both Native American focused museums and mainstream museums that are doing good things to elevate Native American art.
Do you find that storytelling takes an elevated? I mean, my own first exposure to Native arts and culture was really in the spoken word. There were oral traditions that were handed down, and I used to listen to recordings because I love the stories of different cultures. Do you find that in your presentation of art, that storytelling takes a more prominent role? And how does that jive with sort of the traditionalist museum education or museology that we all learn, John, when we're studying this field?
Well, I think museums in general have moved forward, and some more so than others, but we've long adopted the sense that the words, whether they're written or spoken, need to be from Native people and not about them. So we've done that with label panels, but also with audio and video recordings. And I think one of the wonderful things about working with artists of today, the contemporary artists, is we're able to document them via video. And for example, our contemporary art fellows have all been recorded in broadcast quality video, and we've been doing that for 2 decades. And the database of information and stories, background on the art that we collect physically that comes out in those videos is powerful. And I think one of the things we need to do is make those videos accessible to the public in a searchable database format, and that's something we're working on now.
I have a number of questions here that I want to put with you. First of all, one of the attendees said, "Let's not forget the Hood Museum," which we certainly don't want to do. In terms of the redefinition of our past history and our discovery of past history of which many of us are not aware, how do you think these museums need to function, and your communities of artists, people who advance the art, must function in order to modernize Americans' understanding of this country's past and contextualize it? Della, do you want to take a shot at that?
with our educational programming that accompanies our exhibits, we have panelists present periodically on a number of issues that are current among Native people, be it in, related to health or, we did a sovereignty food symposium 2 or 3 years ago, because people, all they know, the majority of people, they just know a lot of the negative statistics about Native people. So we felt it was important to let the public know that, Native people now are exerting their sovereignty more and more, and they're addressing their own problems. And there's some amazing things that are happening in Native communities. They're developing their own schools. They've, taken over the management or building new hospitals. They're operating very efficiently. So for the average person, all you see are negative statistics. So we feel it's really important to educate people about the natives of today, and then have them tell about their projects. But at the same time, they're able to bring in, the history of their respective pueblos or tribes. Now, the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, our focus is on the tribes and pueblos of the greater Southwest, because, we have limited space and limited dollars for staff, so we can't have a lot of experts on all these 574 different tribes and Alaska Native people. So we have to focus, only on primarily on the Southwest. So I think that's one way, we inform the public, but we also have artists coming in talking about, their work, and most of them can trace where they learned this form of art generations. And so they bring in the stories of their great grandparents that made pottery. And then they talk about how it's been handed down to them, and the terms around why they made that, pottery. And we also have an ongoing pottery demonstration program for these people from the communities to talk about their work and their art and their culture.
The wonderful thing about this sector is that people share knowledge. So between Nancy Rossoff, Liz Glassman, Mary Kershaw, Joanne Balzer, we've received, people are pointed to the Denver Art Museum, the Field Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, so many others, the Nelson Atkins Museum. It's wonderful to when you look at this picture and you start to connect the dots, Lulani, right? There are a lot of dots to connect, aren't there?
Absolutely a lot of dots to connect. And I think one of the things I wanted to share with you folks is that about a year ago this time, we had been working with the NEA and some of the federal agencies to co-host a convening in DC for Native arts and cultures for about 5 years. And it finally came to fruition in 2019. We were able to cram it at the end of the year, plan it with an advisory council, and it happened in February, right before the COVID. So we were able to meet in person in DC, and it was co-hosted by NEA, NEH, and about 4 other federal agencies that do a lot of work with tribal communities, particularly in the creative industries, but beyond also, like Anna, for example. And we planned with the advisory council a day-long session, a day and a half. We had a reception at NMAI the night before, and then the next day was a full day's session with a series of panels that featured Native American artists, administrators, leaders, to talk about the work that they're doing in community and the issues they'd like to see relative to federal agencies. So we had about 250 people there. So that was kind of a beginning, a start. we're producing a report from that we're going to be launching on March 30th. I'll make sure you have that link, all of you. And in affiliation with Grant Makers in the Arts, NACF and NEA are co-hosting that webinar to launch the recommendations that came from that report. So we're really excited about that because that's a lot of, not everybody could attend that. We had limited funding and limited planning time, but to make it more available and for discussion and access, this webinar will launch the report, and then we're going to have study groups after that to help implement some of the recommendations. And one of those, Della and John, has to do with museums. There were some museum and what some of the other museums are doing, some recommendations around museums. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're coming to the end of our time. John, I'd like you to just sort of outline the agenda for the Eiteljorg for the next months and the next years, what you have on tap. And then Della, we're going to give you the last word. John?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of things I could talk about, but I want to mention one thing that we're very excited about. The museum's presentation of Native art and culture has been very broad and very encyclopedic, and we will continue to be about all of North America's communities. However, we've made a real commitment to focus our attention and energy on the Great Lakes cultures. This is where we live. We occupy the land of the Miami and the Potawatomi and others, and that has not been one of our strongest points here at the Eiteljorg. But over the next 10 years, you're going to see an extraordinary change, and that will be a much bigger focus. And we've been collecting, we've been exhibiting, we've been engaging the communities of the Great Lakes region. So stay tuned for that.
It's part of the history. I think that's so important. Our history did not start with Europeans coming to the shore. And the fact that I am a white person who is living in a place means that I also need to know about that place, its history, and I need to make a contribution by at least being myself informed to preservation of those memories and listening to people who have that knowledge to transfer. It's only a matter of respect, right? If we're going to be Americans, then we have to know about America, right, Della?
Yes, and I have to say this with respect. You know, I loved the inauguration yesterday, but I didn't get to watch the whole thing, so maybe they did include some indigenous people. But it would have been appropriate at some point during the day to acknowledge whose land this was, and we welcome, you know, everybody's Americans now, but they should always acknowledge that this land belonged to the Native Americans. And also they could have had a Native person do a prayer, incorporate them. They had other minority cultures in there, but Native people were left out again. And that's why we are so invisible, because we're such a small minority. Anyway, that's just Della Warrior, you know, talking. But back to what is,
being a warrior.
Well, what we have coming up, I already mentioned the glass exhibit, but we've had one of our permanent exhibits, the Here Now and Always exhibition that was put up in 1997. We have been in doing planning and fundraising. So construction will start next month, and that exhibit will open in the spring of 22. And also I mentioned the Contemporary Gallery, the new one. Actually, that is funded by Drs. Joanne and Bob Balzer. They made a very generous gift towards the new this new gallery, and it has a long name, so I hope I get it right. Joanne and Bob Balzer Contemporary, Gallery of Native Market and Contemporary Art. So that should be really exciting because it's going to feature the very best of Native art from these various art markets, kind of the winners of the, you know, these various awards and in the different mediums. That will open also in 22. And coming this year, we have our annual Native Treasures Art Market, which is during the Memorial Day weekend. This year, it's going to be virtual again, unless there's the vaccines get distributed quicker than we think they will be. It'll be virtual, and we'll have about 150 artists on that. And this event supports the artists as well as MIAC. And we also on our website, let me give you this, it's indianartsandculture.org. And we have lots and lots of videos by Native artists from different mediums that people could watch and learn if they're interested. But there's some fabulous profiles of artists on there as well. So I invite everyone to go to our website and look at all of our videos and the YouTube and all the things that were happening at MIAC. And thank you very much for making me a part of this. It's good to see John and Lulani. And I want to share this. I was one of the lead consultants on the Native American Arts and Culture to help create that with the Ford Foundation funds, and also raising money to match that. So I'm really thrilled that it has not only made it, it's survived, and they're doing a great job, Lulani. So just keep up the good work.
Thank
So
you,
our last two polls are really interesting. 75% of the people who have responded have said that they were most exposed to Native American art through museums. The last poll is really about how important people feel that Native American art is. 88% felt it is very important to their lives and their sensibilities. Look, we have an opportunity to create the country that we want to have. The idea of different sensibilities and dialogue with each other, not necessarily conceding, but in vigorous debate, and debate that that unfolds in a cordial and determined way. That creates our country. And this is, I'm so thankful to be able to sit here and learn from you and to participate with you in this dialogue. Let's keep the dialogue going. Thank you all participants for coming. Stay safe, and thank you, guests, for helping to enlighten us.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care all.
Thank